For the record, everyone, welcome. It's our Dick Crews annual debate, January 13th, 2021. Our topic this year, chosen by President Pettyjohn, is Hollywood Goes to War, the Civil One. And the question is, what movie or TV production has had the greatest impact on how we view the events surrounding the Civil War? Our 5 debaters each pick their own movie or TV production, first come, first served, and we're asked to speak for 5 minutes, then take questions from the members for another 5, and finally to take part in a general discussion and rebuttal session with the other debaters. At the conclusion of the debate, as Steve said, you'll each have the chance to vote using the Zoom webinar polling function. All votes will be anonymously cast, automatically tabulated, and displayed for all to see once balloting has closed. The debate winner, chosen by vote of the membership, will, as always, receive fabulous prizes. My thanks to our debaters tonight. In the order they will speak tonight, as determined by a random draw just a few moments ago, they are, as it happens, number 1, Dick Crews, if you can join us. Number 2, and Dick will be speaking as to Ken Burns' Civil War documentary from 1990. Number 2 will be Hans Kenzie, speaking on Gone with the Wind from 1939. Number 3 will be Dr. Pat Bray, speaking on The Birth of a Nation, 1915. Number 4 will be Jimmy Mankhouse, speaking about Steven Spielberg's movie Lincoln from 2012. And number 5, Eric Lindblade, speaking about the movie Gettysburg from 1993. This was by random draw. Eric is a new member, as Steve said, and a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg, and I particularly welcome him. And I would also particularly welcome former Roundtable President Dick Crews, who, as many of you know, now lives in North Carolina. Hopefully he will be able to join us before too long. I've assured our debaters that just because the debate is named after Dick, he does not have any built-in advantage. Everybody's votes at the conclusion of the debate should, of course, be on the merits. Mr. Pettyjohn.
Mr. Moderator, I have on my mobile phone Mr. Dick Crews. He has been trying valiantly to get in, and there's something wrong. I asked him if he would be willing to give it a try if I would pretend to be him, hold up my phone when it's his turn, and let him participate by audio only.
Can he hear me right now?
Yes, I just heard him laughing about what you said.
All right, good.
All right, can we just try a quick test? I'm going to put him on the speaker on my phone, and we'll see if he's coming through for you, okay?
All right.
All right, Dick, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, Cleveland Civil War Roundtable.
Good evening, Dick.
Hello, Dick.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. I joined the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable in 1990. It proved to be a great year for a Civil War enthusiast like myself, because on September 23rd, 1990, the public television ran Ken Burns's The Civil War.
Dick, I'm sorry, if I may, it's not your turn to go just yet.
Oh, okay.
If you were leading into your 5-minute spiel.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to try and hold my phone close enough so he can hear.
Please do.
William, you just
Dick,
this thing, and my job will be hold the phone up. Okay.
Very good. Dick, we're almost there, but not quite. Did you hear me state the order of debaters, Dick?
Yes, I did.
All right. As it happens, Dick reminded us during a practice tech session on Monday night that the debate got its start as a roundtable tradition because of the difficulty of finding speakers who were willing to travel to Cleveland in January. And in moderating again tonight, I stand on the shoulders of giants, including Dick. I encouraged our debaters, as I always do, to practice their remarks aloud beforehand and to time themselves as they do. In the past, some debaters have been surprised and chagrined to see how quickly their 5 minutes fly by. I hate to cut anyone off, but I will if I must, in fairness to the other debaters. I will give each debater a 1-minute warning as his 5 minutes draws to a close, and then a 10-second warning. If you'd like to ask a question during any of the Q&A periods, as Steve said earlier, please hit the Zoom raise hand button, which is probably along the bottom of your computer screen as you mouse over it. If you don't see it when the time comes, please speak up or raise your actual hand if your image does appear, and we'll try to spot you and give you the chance to be unmuted and to ask a question. Finally, you will note a distinct lack of estrogen among our debaters tonight, through no fault of their own. That's because no female members of the roundtable stepped forward when I asked for volunteers. I hope the women of the roundtable will show more courage in the future. They have debated in the past, and I certainly hope they will again. This debate is a lot of fun, as I think any past debater would tell you, and no particular expertise is either expected or required. I also warmly encourage younger and newer members of the roundtable to take part in future debates. Eric is certainly proving the truth of that, as this is perhaps his first meeting entirely, and he's jumping in with both boots on as a debater. Are there any questions either for President Pettyjohn or me before we begin? Hearing none, our first debater, as I indicated before, by random draw, is Dick Cruz, who will be speaking on Ken Burns' Civil War documentary from 1990. Thank you, Dick. Please take it away.
Evening, Cleveland Civil War Roundtable members. This is Dick Cruz. I joined the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable in 1990. It proved to be a good year for the Civil War enthusiasts like myself. On September 23rd, 1990, public television put on Ken Burns's The Civil War. 40 million people watched that broadcast, and it was on for 4 more nights. Ken Burns won 2 Oscars, 2 Emmys for its effort in this work. One of the interesting things about how he did it was he had special guests who would, they were almost all authors, who would come on and explain certain parts of the Civil War. One of those being our friend Ed Barst. And I did want to say that we're going to miss Ed. If you didn't know, he talked to the roundtable 15 times. And after his last time, which was a year ago, December, he died. So anyhow, but however, the author who did stole the show was a guy named Shelby Foote, who presented himself as an English poet. And if you ever saw him, he looks like one. He stole the show. Shelby Foote should be explained. People think he is a historian. He is not. He didn't even know where the archive was in Washington. He's interested in the Civil War. He's a great writer, and he takes the information from other people. But if you're reading a Shelby Foote book, you can feel the cannons firing, and you can smell the gunpowder. And so he takes out that fact that people hate history because it's dull. He doesn't make it dull at all. I was the elected president of the Cleveland Civil War Roundtable in 1999. And several people asked me about whether we could get Shelby Foote. Well, it didn't take me long to get an answer to that. Shelby Foote charged $13,000 for an appearance, and we only had a budget of $2,000, so that settled that issue. However, 2 years later, the judge, William Vaudry, became president, and sure enough, there was Shelby Foote's name on the speaker's list. So I asked Vaudry, I said, where did you get the $13,000? He didn't tell me. He hasn't told me to this day. Maybe you can find out. But he did come. We had a joint meeting with the Western Reserve Historical Society, and it was a great evening. Where did you get that $13,000, William? I don't hear him answering me.
The meter's still running, Dick.
It's interesting in the fact that many people have asked me, and I'm sure they have asked you over the years, why are you studying a war that was 150 or 200 years ago? Well, as the events in the United States proved this week, the war isn't over. And we're going to have to explain that to the audience again. Even today, when Congress was talking about impeaching Trump, 4 times Lincoln's sayings were put in, 2 for each side. So maybe
1 minute remaining.
if everybody does agree on Lincoln. But it's going to be a chore for us to explain to people this war isn't over. Those were Confederate battle flags that they were busting into the Capitol with. So, but if you want somebody who wants an entertaining couple of hours, and buy Ken Burns's The Civil War, and it's my nomination for the best historical book on the Civil War. Take care, gang. Thanks.
Thank you, Dick. We'll now have 5 minutes for questions of Dick.
Are those coming from the panelists at this point, William?
No, it's for everybody listening in. I do not see any hands raised. If you would rather submit your question in writing, you may use the
Oh, wait a
chat.
minute, we got a bunch of hands that just went up.
Ah,
I don't know where you want to start. You're the moderator. There's a whole, do you see them, William? Dan Zeiser through Henry Evans.
oh yes, I do see them now. Thank you. We'll start from the top. Dan,
That's a Z. It can't be at the top.
it is this time. Dan, you're unmuted. You may ask your question.
Dan, you have to unmute yourself.
This is Dan Ursu. My question is, Dick, do you know how
I'm
many?
sorry, Dan. We were waiting for Dan Zeiser. Has
Okay.
Dan? I'm sorry. I do
No.
see your hand as well.
I unmute.
Dan Zeiser, speak now, or for the moment, hold your peace. All right, we'll go to Dan Ursu next. Go ahead, Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Dick, how many staff did Ken Burns have helping him, and over what period did they actually work on the documentary? Do you know either of those answers?
Yeah, I don't know the staff. Of course, his brother, works with him, and he has, I think it's Lynn, I think is a woman that works with him. But he explained that publishers don't like him because a work like this, he worked on the Civil War for 6.5 years. Don't want to wait that long.
Yeah, that's a long time. Well, great. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Dick.
As it happens, the next hand I see up, as displayed by Zoom, is Dan Bonder. Go ahead, Dan Bonder.
Dick, I just was curious, during the Civil War Roundtable program, what areas do you think Ken Burns really focused on to enlighten people about areas of the Civil War with which they may not have been familiar?
Well, really, he as Shelby Foote did, they worked on a lot of the people situations. How the people were going. What happened to the draft, things like that. They do mention the battles, but that's not their key thing. They're trying to give you a feeling of how people lived during the war.
Thank you. The next name I see here is Henry Evans. Henry, go ahead.
Okay, I am unmuted. But my
Yes,
question,
you are. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, for the scope of the debate, is the impact for the Civil War fan, which production, or for the non-Civil War enthusiast? And my question is for Dick, do you know to what extent did Ken Burns' documentary turn the non-Civil War fan into a Civil War fan or into a student of the Civil War?
Okay, but
And I will mute myself.
So, if you're interested in the Civil War and you want a nice light book that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1957, was also our speaker at our first year, which was 1957, and it deals with the Overland Campaign grant, and but it's a half-inch book. It takes when Grant leaves Washington, D.C. and heads for Richmond in 1864. And I always tell people, you get the end of the book and you're not interested, stop right there.
Dan Zeiser has posted his question in the chat, and he wrote, how did Burns's Civil War series change the view of the war?
Well, it changed the view of the war in the fact that, and Shelby Foote and, well, Ed Bars to a little lesser extent, started talking about what was happening in the country when the war was going on. And I think that's important because, as I said in the beginning, I don't think the war's over. Do you?
Our last question is from Maynard Bauer.
Hey, Maynard, how you doing, buddy?
Maynard, you're on mute. You need to take yourself off mute.
If you mouse down to the lower left corner, you'll see a mute button. There you go.
Got it?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Dick, my question had been partially answered, and that is, how does this Burns's material change the minds of people that would have been affected by the other previous books, or later books rather, earlier books, pardon me?
Well, I think Burns has done about 30 of these, or plus 30s, and they don't seem to have any connection because he picked certain people out, like he did Shelby Foote. He interviewed Shelby Foote 8 times because he felt he gave the war a different perspective, and of course that's why he took him 6.5 years to do these things. But in that respect, he's unique.
Steve, we're a good bit past 5 minutes at this point. I see my fellow Oberlin grad, Jim Rokakis, has posted a question in the chat. Would you like me to go ahead and pose it to Dick, or would you rather move on?
Well, let's go ahead and let Dick answer.
All right. Jim Rokakis has posted in the chat, Dick, was the series equally well received in the South as well as it was received in other parts of the country?
No, I don't know. I thought about that myself, but I don't remember any stories at the time that gave you any numbers.
I would agree. My own recollection is there was no particular backlash in the South against it, and it seemed to be equally appreciated everywhere.
Well, that sounds fine. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but, those guys that busted into the Capitol with the battle flags, they didn't think like that.
All right. Thank you, Dick.
Take care, buddies.
Our next speaker is Hans Kenzie, who will be speaking on Gone with the Wind, the 1939 film. Hans.
Thank you. And there can be no question as to which movie or TV production has had the greatest impact on how we view the Civil War. By any measure, it is Gone with the Wind, the American film epic first released in 1939. 3 reasons support this to be true. To begin, of those productions before you tonight, Gone with the Wind is the most widely viewed film of them all. It was given the Oscar award as the best film of 1939, beating such other films as The Wizard of Oz, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and Wuthering Heights. It received 10 Academy Award nominations, or awards, excuse me, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress. When it first appeared in theaters, it was during the golden age of cinema, and it broke box office records. And within 4 years of its release, it had sold across the United States 60 million tickets, which were sales equivalent to just under half of the United States population at the time. Given this success, MGM re-released the film in theaters nationwide in 1954, 1961, 1967, 1971, 1974, 1989, and most recently in 1998. I first saw it in a theater in 1967. When adjusted for inflation, Gone with the Wind is still the highest grossing film in movie history. And it remains immensely popular with audiences into the 21st century. Harris Interactive undertook 2 nationwide polls of Americans in 2008 and 2014, surveying over 2,000 adults, with the results weighted by age, sex, race, household income, education, so as to match the composition of the United States population. And in both polls, the most popular film was voted to be Gone with the Wind. The second reason supporting its huge impact upon our national psyche is the pure majesty of the film. Karen and I recently watched it again just to be reminded of how great it is. For starters, it's nearly 4 hours long, and that includes a 10-minute intermission. It was filmed in Technicolor, which just made all the scenery and colors so vivid and rich. It features plenty of folk and patriotic music, including familiar Stephen Foster tunes, as well as Civil War songs like Dixie, Gary Owen, and the Bonnie Blue Flag. For those who may not remember, Gone with the Wind tells the story of Scarlett O'Hara, the strong-willed daughter of a Georgia plantation owner against the backdrop of the Civil War. In the film, she is married 3 times, most notoriously to the handsome gambler Rhett Butler. The film is filled with indelible scenes of plantation life in the Old South, grand balls in which lavishly dressed young ladies and their beaux dance the Virginia Reel, the declaration of war, the Confederate war effort, the deterioration of Southern society as a result of the war, death and mayhem, the attack on of Atlanta, hospital scenes involving amputation, soldiers, thousands of wounded and maimed soldiers lying in the rail yard, the evacuation of the city, the burning of Atlanta, looters, traumatized and delusional veterans, the deprivations of war, and the subsequent occupation by the Union, and followed by the dreaded carpetbaggers.
1 minute.
The story follows Scarlett as she perseveres and does everything possible to save Tara. And I have some quotes that I could read. I think one of the most famous quotes was, "One's home is really the only thing that matters, the only thing that lasts." And of course, Rhett Butler saying that his fellow Southerners, all we've got is cotton and slaves and arrogance. Finally, the final reason this film by comparison has had the greatest impact is that when you look at these other films, Birth of a Nation was filmed 100 years ago and it's a silent film. The other 3 are too modern to have an impact, had an impact even approaching the impact of Gone with the Wind. By the time these other films were broadcast, there were just too many other forms of entertainment available to the American public.
10 seconds.
TV, music, movies, sports, gaming, or just plain surfing the net. None of them had the stamp on our national consciousness as great as Gone with the Wind. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. And if I may, as my moderator's prerogative, 2 brief bits about Gone with the Wind. When Ted Turner owned the Braves and owned a mall in downtown Atlanta, I was there in 1988, and Gone with the Wind was shown every night at the movie theater there. There was a theater set aside for that. And a young man who later rose to some great fame sang as part of his gospel choir at the segregated 1939 premiere of Gone with the Wind. His name was Martin Luther King Jr. We'll now turn to 5 minutes of questioning. Please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question.
Dan Bonder had a question, had his hand up before anybody else, I think.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, I forgot to unraise my hand.
Oh, was that from before?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Dan Geiser, did you wish to ask a question of Hans?
Yes,
Go ahead.
Hans, given the recent reevaluation of all things historic, when it comes to the Civil War. Do you believe that has diminished the impact that Gone with the Wind has had?
I don't believe so. The movie depicts slavery, of course, and they're not just shown as domestic servants. I mean, there is some cruelty shown in the film. Obviously, it doesn't depict perhaps life as it really was, but I don't think it sugarcoats it either. I mean, to the point where people would say this is pure fiction, this is pure nonsense. I think it's a product of its time, but it's also not. You don't have to suspend your disbelief to watch it. I think it rings true.
Thank you. Henry Evans, did you wish to ask a question as well, or was that left over
I do,
from the first
I do.
speaker?
No, I do wish to ask a question.
Please go ahead.
Okay, my question's kind of a follow-up to the last question, Hans.
Yeah.
Do you think with the perception that people are now looking back at U.S. history, to what extent has that adversely influenced the acceptance of Gone with the Wind? Or to frame it a different way, is Gone with the Wind such a great movie depicting really what happened there? Is that the reason why it's now being censored?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a movie against the backdrop of the Civil War. It's not a Civil War film per se. And so as a result, there's a storyline. The storyline is really of Scarlett O'Hara and everything that happens to her and her family and larger things in life, like the value of one's home, the value of one's family. There is, a romantic element involved. So it was based on a novel. It's not a historical rewriting of the Civil War or a telling of the Civil War. It's a story of a family against the backdrop of the Civil War. So it has value to not only historian, Civil War enthusiasts, but to the general public. That's why it's half the country saw it back in the early 40s. It's a great story.
Terry has his hands up. Perhaps it's Terry Kuzer.
Harry, somebody.
Terry, you may unmute yourself and ask your question if you wish.
The question is, was any of the characters representing real people at that time? Was any of the characters representing real people, or were they all fictitious?
No, they were all fictitious characters. Of course, references made to, the Confederate leadership, the Union leadership, the Lincoln, the General Lee. It's told against the backdrop of real events. The burning of Atlanta, the attack and the burning of Atlanta, particularly, is the special effects that were used are still they made me gasp by seeing how they filmed this. I don't know how they filmed it, yeah, but it's such a grand scale that you got a sense of really the level of destruction and what people endured during the war.
Maynard, did you have a question for Hans as well?
Yes, Hans, how would you react to the question of if it was a monument rather than a movie, would it likely be torn down today because of its inaccuracies?
That's hard to say. I mean, it all depends upon the, how fine the filter is. It may be. I can tell you at the beginning of the film, a disclaimer is run saying that these events are fictional, yet they depict events and attitudes and a way of life that was wrong at the time, was wrong then, and it's wrong now. And I thought that was fair to say. And then they throw the film. You can, by the way, it's available. I think it's on Netflix. Netflix, I think it was on Netflix. Yeah, I think it cost $3 to watch it.
John C. Fazio has a question.
Hans, aren't you troubled somewhat by the strong Southern bias of the movie? And a strong Southern bias, of course, gives a very distorted view of the entire war. If someone based his opinion of the Civil War on Gone with the Wind, which is what you are implicitly suggesting, he would have a horribly distorted view of it, in my opinion. What's your opinion?
Well, yeah, I put it this way. It is told from a Southern point of view, no question. The Union soldiers that appear in the movie are either shown in a neutral neutral tone or actually as enemies, or as aiding carpetbaggers. I mean, it's a Southern story. It's based on a book. I guess what I'm saying is that this is not a history of the Civil War, and it's not a movie that is intended to explain everything. What it did, though, is create an impression of the events that occurred at the time that I think, having 9 nationwide theatrical releases affected 2 or 3 generations of Americans. And so when people think of what the Civil War must have involved or was like, I think a lot of people, many people, more so than these other films, created the impression that was lasting.
Mr. President, we're past 5 minutes. We have 2 other questions pending if you'd like, or we can move on.
I think we should take the questions. They're from 2 of the ladies in the audience.
Very well. Jean Rhodes, please go ahead. Jean, go ahead. Jean, you'll need to unmute yourself if you mouse down to the lower left corner.
There, it wasn't there before. I'm sorry. I've also, okay. Hans, I heard once that Margaret Mitchell was asked why she never wrote another book. And she said, that was all I had to say. And I'm wondering if did she ever see the movie? And what did she think of it?
Yeah, I know that answer's out there someplace. I did not look at that. Because it's based on a book, and I've been told the book is great. I know my wife has read the book. She read it as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Margaret Mitchell was certainly a Southern author, and she she wrote the book based on her innate biases. But it's a great story, and because it's told against historical events, I think that it has merit and it has value, and it certainly has created the greatest impression of any production currently available.
Thank you.
Hans, somebody who may be familiar to you, an Olivia Kenzie is asking,
well,
how do you justify Gone with the Wind being more impactful than The Birth of the Nation when the latter influenced how the story was adapted and actors were cast?
Well, thank you,
How
Olivia.
sharper than a serpent's tooth.
Chip off the old block. I think that we'll have Mr. Bray explain the value of the Birth of a Nation. I think he's going to come at it. I think I know how he's going to come at it. Put it this way: I tried to answer the question straight on. He's going to come at it from an angle to try to convince you that its biases were so influential at the time that we're still dealing with the consequences of that film. And okay, that may be true, but if the question is to answer the question, which films had the greatest impact on how we view the Civil War, it's not how we view racism or how we view African Americans or how we view race relations. It's how we view the Civil War. And I submit that that's Gone with the Wind.
Thank you, Hans. Our next speaker is will indeed speak on The Birth of a Nation from 1915. Go ahead, Pat.
Okay. In the early 20th century, motion pictures were the third-rate entertainment, a cheap novelty, mostly amateurish productions. The industry was revolutionized by D.W. Griffith in 1915 with the release of Birth of a Nation, which was America's very first box office smash. Now, during the movie's unprecedented 3 hours and 10 minutes running time, Griffith pioneered filmmaking techniques that remain central to the art of movie making today. Many film historians agree that Griffith is the father of the American cinema. However, many now acknowledge that the explicit racism content of the movie makes it one of the most offensive and destructive movies of all time. Now, tonight we are charged with debating, quote, the Hollywood product which has had the greatest impact on the public's view of the war. I'm quoting President Pettyjohn's update in December, the public's view of the war, the general public, the mass audience, not the well-read Civil War enthusiast. That's who we're supposed to address. We must also look for something that has the greatest impact, the most profound and long-lasting influence on the nation's historical memory. For a Hollywood product to be massively impactful, it need not be uplifting, righteous, or even remotely truthful. And certainly The Birth of a Nation was none of those things. Indeed, its content was repugnant. In 2001, the historian David Blight, this audience knows, explained the phenomenon as following, quote, "The lasting significance of this epic film is that by using powerful imagery buttressed by enormous advertising and political endorsement, it etched a story of the war that has lasted long in Americans' historical consciousness. The film's clear message is that Reconstruction was directed by deranged radicals and sex-crazed blacks. Hence, Southern white men had no choice but to take the law and history into their own hands," end quote. Now, all the grotesque Jim Crow stereotypes are in this movie. Uppity, ungrateful, venal black men who terrorize helpless whites, shoving them off the sidewalk, blocking their access to the ballot box, leering at their women, obviously with rape in mind. Blacks ridicule and chain their own masters. They abuse any former slaves who are still loyal. They make a mockery of democratic government by sitting barefoot in legislative chambers, feet up on the desk, drinking whiskey from bottles, eating fried chicken off the bone, while passing laws that enact interracial marriage. Now, of course, all the black characters in the movie are actually white characters, white people in blackface. In sum, The Birth of a Nation is deliberate propaganda, just as effective and as corrosive as Hitler's Triumph of the Will, but having a much longer period of time to impact the public's mind. Now, prior to the release of Birth of a Nation, no movie lasted longer than 50 minutes. Most of them were far shorter than that. And that included the largely forgotten Battle of Gettysburg, released in 1913. Griffith was inspired to a much, much more ambitious project. Now, the basis for his movie was also a novel, Thomas Dixon's The Klansman. And after a private screening, Dixon suggested to Griffith that you change the name of the movie to The Birth of a Nation. This implied that the Civil War and Reconstruction had spawned a newer and better nation, one based on permanent white supremacy. The movie cost $130,000. Nonetheless, it was highly profitable, both in the North and the West. Admission was $2 a ticket. That's $84 in today's money. Birth of a Nation was the first movie to have a gala premiere, first to be shown in the White House, where Woodrow Wilson resided. It is disputed whether Wilson actually said, quote, "My only regret is that the movie is terribly true," end quote, but there's no doubt he endorsed it. Now, the racist content of the movie drew protests at the time. The NAACP, which was founded in 1909, tried unsuccessfully to get the movie banned outright. Boycotts and riots ensued. If violence occurred during a riot, it was almost always whites attacking blacks. But the movie's popularity was not diminished. Wrote one frustrated NAACP official, quote, "I am utterly disgusted with the situation in regard to this movie. Kindly remember that we have put 6 weeks of constant effort on this thing and have gotten nowhere," end quote. Paradoxically, the movie dramatically increased the membership of both the NAACP and the newly revived KKK, but much more the latter group, which used this movie for years as a recruiting tool. In 1915, the vast majority of Americans had no living memory of the Civil War, and there were millions of newly arrived immigrants who were even less aware. Tragically, the general public was likely to conclude after viewing this movie that the current Jim Crow laws and similar practices were not only justified, but entirely essential. So the movie catalyzed, solidified, and hardened the spirit of the times.
10 seconds.
Of the country. The end.
Thank you. If you have a question to ask Pat Bray, please raise your hand.
Guess you got everybody convinced, Pat.
Henry Evans has a question.
I do have a question for you, Pat. At the time that the movie came out, there were other ideals that were being built. I mean, other monuments in the South and the North that were being built to honor the Civil War. And much later here in South Dakota, Mount Rushmore would be carved on a monument by a member of the Ku Klux Klan on a mountain that was called the Mountain of the Six Fathers, the Native American people. To what extent did Birth of a Nation influence that movement?
I don't know that. Most of the Civil War monuments were built a little bit before 1915. You know, the late 1890s and early 1900 was the peak of it. What I'm saying about this movie is the counter revolution was already on with the establishment of NAACP, which was founded on February 12th, 1909, centennial of Lincoln's birthday. And there was a movement to push back against all that. So the Birth of a Nation was sort of the counter revolution that solidified the already prevalent Jim Crow laws and segregation practices.
Lily, I see you'd posted in the chat a historical observation. Did you have a question you'd like to ask Pat?
Hi, am I unmuted?
You're
Go ahead.
Okay. So Pat, you said that there were no Black actors in The Birth of a Nation, but that's actually not true. The main Black acting roles were all played by white actors in blackface, but most of the extras are noticeably played by actual Black actors, including that scene that you mentioned in the State House where they're all like barefoot and eating chicken or whatever. Do you know if any of the Black actors who were in The Birth of a Nation had any comments on either their experience making it, their opinions on it afterward, if they saw it, whether they felt, whether they had any regrets or conflicted feelings, I guess?
I don't know that. I know that none of the African Americans that appeared in the movie got credited. So what I'm saying is anybody that got a credit was a white person in blackface. It had a huge number of extras, almost 100,000 when you count the battlefield scenes. So yeah, there were some African Americans in the movie, but I imagine they got paid next to nothing, and they certainly didn't get paid. And I don't know what attitude they had other than I got a paycheck.
Mel Maurer.
Hi, Pat.
Hi.
The proximity of the Civil War itself, when this came out, roughly 50 years.
Yes.
Unbelievable, but it's like us talking about the Vietnam War.
Right.
Did this proximity have a lot to do with the influence and the propaganda effect this movie had on our country?
From what I've read of this period, except in the South where they were putting up monuments, a lot of the country had moved way on beyond the Civil War, and it wasn't, much commemorated, and it was largely forgotten. And this movie, at least in the North and the West, kind of revived interest in it, and to the negative. So that's the way I read the period.
Dave asked in chat, I don't know which Dave this is there evidence that Birth of a Nation still impacts people's views of the Civil War?
There's a theater at Bowling Green University named the Lillian Gish Theater. It's being renamed because Lillian Gish was in the movie, and therefore it's one of these sort of reconsiderations for history. The movie is much more restricted in its distribution now, and there's always some sort of disclaimer in the front of it, but it's still studied in film. You look at any movie review book, it's got 4 stars. I looked at several books that review movies, and they all give it the highest possible rating. So it's still going to be around, even if it's not widely distributed.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator.
Yes, sir.
The President asked a question.
Sure, go ahead.
The state of Ohio initially banned this movie.
Right.
Did any other states take that action?
Certain cities banned it, and even the bans were not necessarily permanent. I think Boston briefly banned it, but I don't know that any state banned it other than Ohio.
Yeah, and then the people in Cincinnati got that decision overthrown.
All they'd do was go to Kentucky to see it.
Steve, do you recall, was it banned because it was thought it would exacerbate racial tension or some other reason?
Among other things, yes, they thought it was a distortion of the truth. I guess there were still enough Civil War veterans in Ohio to take umbrage with it.
Was that by order of the governor or was there a law passed?
I think it was the legislature.
Yeah, I think so. Mhm.
I had not heard that. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jimmy Menkhaus, who will be speaking on the movie Lincoln from 2012. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Thank you, William. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation to be here with you tonight. As you peruse the list of movies up for debate, you may have come to mind and thought, Lincoln, that's quite the underdog compared to these other timeless classics. But we learned about the power of an underdog this past Sunday with the Browns, didn't we? I want to offer that our debate tonight isn't really about the Civil War or about movies. Rather, it's about criteria. How do we measure a movie's impact? Is it by the number of people who have viewed the movie or the awards it has won? I do not believe that these are the best criteria, or I would have chosen a much older movie that has surely been seen by more people. I am going to propose 3 criteria in the next 4 minutes. In order to measure impact, we must look at these elements: the cinematic components, the accuracy of the portrayal, and its prophetic nature. First, cinematic. Creating a movie involves acting, directing, producing, music, lighting. Lincoln won 41 awards and was nominated for over 140 by various film festivals. Are there movies we're debating tonight that have won more? Certainly. It grossed $275.3 million and is considered a hit by critics and fans. But again, there are movies that we are talking about that made more money. I only claim that in this area, this movie belongs in the conversation. It is a movie of reasonable length that you can watch in one sitting, not 11 hours or 4 hours. It's a movie that gives insight into various components of the war: political, economic, strategic, the fear of enlistment, etc. While some movies on this list demonstrate only a small snippet of the war, this one follows the final months of it and not resorting to 11 hours to teach the lesson. To have impact, it must be watchable, well-crafted, and be of high production value. My second criteria, accuracy. This movie is not meant to be a documentary. It is a work of historical fiction. However, historians have said that while the movie is fictional in dialogue, it embodies the truth of the man of Lincoln and his struggle to pass the 13th Amendment. It also focuses truthfully on the evils of slavery. While some movies on this list romanticize the plight of slaves or the cause for freedom, Lincoln faces it head on. The romanticization of slavery is one of the worst ills a movie can do. Sure, one might argue about the historical truth of the length of Lincoln's beard or the size of his top hat in the movie, but a movie that makes slavery seem any less than a deplorable institution does a disservice not only to the women and men who died in bondage, but serves only to fan the flames of division today. A sense of historical accuracy is key. To have a great historical impact, one must accurately display history. And my third point, prophetic. As a theology teacher, we talk a lot about the importance of a prophetic message. What speaks to us today? When I picked this movie, I had in mind the death of George Floyd and how the summer of 2020 has been a reckoning for the tension between Black and white America. When you watch Lincoln, you watch his desire to have the 13th Amendment passed, you see not only 1865, but 2020. As the Lincoln character in the movie says, we are stepped out upon the world stage with the fate of human dignity in our hands. Blood's been spilled to afford us this moment. These words could have been equally spoken during the summer of 2020. And since my pick of this movie, we can now add a second reason to choose it. A week ago, the Confederate flag flew in the halls of our capital, a sight we had not feared since the Civil War. Our country grieves at its division as forces of insurrection continue to plot to overthrow our government. Again, in the movie, the Lincoln character says, show the world that democracy isn't chaos, that there is a great and invisible strength in a people's union. Words that we need to hear again in 2021. Which movie on this list is timely? Which speaks to not only honoring history, but to paving the way to the future? Of all the movies on this list, Lincoln is the one that you can watch now in 2020 and walk away challenged to make change in our country.
1 minute.
Emboldened by the spirit of Lincoln to unite our country and remove the blight of racism once and for all. And so in conclusion, I do not think that our debate tonight is about which movie has been viewed the most or which one that you personally remember watching when you were younger. I think impact is about truth and pointing a way forward by looking behind. And maybe you disagree, but I offer that Lincoln's message that a house divided against itself cannot stand is not a lesson for dust-covered history books, but is the lesson that reminds us today that the cause of justice and equality remains present in our midst. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Would anybody like to ask a question of Jimmy? If so, please raise your hand. Dan Zeiser.
Jimmy, do you think that the limited aspect of the Lincoln movie, that month or so, and when the 13th Amendment was being passed, do you think that limits the impact that the movie itself has had?
Thank you, Dan, for your question. I think it's a great question. I find in looking at the other movies on our panel that it's nestled nicely between those that just look at a snippet versus the longer whole iteration of the movie. And I think in watching it, you really get the sense, the feel of much of the war in the dialogue and kind of the focus on ending the war versus having the 13th Amendment passed. So I think that while, as you say, it is only a snippet of the end of the war, I think that they do a nice job of making you feel, in the aging of the Lincoln character, that the war has been ongoing and that we get a nice backstory. So I think one can watch it, and again, historical fiction, not a documentary, but I think one can watch it and still have an appreciation for the longevity of the war through the characterization and the dialogue.
I don't see any other hands up. So building on that, if I may, Jimmy, there was some criticism at the time, I remember, that they were careful to be very historically accurate in some ways, but then purposefully were not in others. They went so far as to record the sound of the door to Lincoln's carriage clicking shut. They went so far as to record the sound of the bells near the White House that he would have heard. And yet they got wrong the vote of the Connecticut delegation in the House. And even after it was pointed out to them before the DVD was released, when they could easily have done a little fiddling with the dialogue, they allowed that error to persist. Why do you think they took such a contradictory approach to historical accuracy?
A great question.
That's the only kind I ask.
Of course. And I don't have an answer as to why one doesn't make a correction of something factual and easier to correct. I think that certainly some of the other things that I've read about the movie that were historical inaccuracies, or at least playing into the narrative a little bit, is the license of the people making the movie to try to build, drama a little bit. So there are certainly historical inaccuracies in the movie. I don't think anyone doesn't contend that. Some of them more easier to fix is the one that you mentioned that perhaps they should have, and others that they allowed to go forward as a way of building the tension of the movie. But I think that at the end of the day, as the historians that I read said, the essence of Lincoln is what you walk away from. So I would never recommend this movie to an 8th grade student who is saying to themselves, I want to learn, to make a book review or a book report about the Civil War. But if you want to understand kind of the essence of the time, then I think that it's accurate in that way. But yes, I certainly agree that there are factual inconsistencies, some that could have been fixed.
Thank you. Dan asked in the chat, William, are you contending that Hollywood is always historically accurate? And no, I would have to be a madman to contend that. What struck me, though, was the almost schizophrenic approach that Spielberg and the other movie makers took, in which they were excruciatingly careful about some historical facts and, as I said, even recording audio to try to be evocative and accurate, yet made needless errors that didn't even necessarily have any dramatic payoff. The Connecticut delegation, as I mentioned, was reported as opposing the 13th Amendment, and as it happened, they were all in favor of it. And that was a needless error. So that was what I was addressing. Dave posts in the chat, Jimmy, you make a good case that Lincoln speaks to current social issues, but how about its impact on the Civil War per se?
Thank you for the question. I think that, kind of the argument that I'm asking you to buy into is that impact is more about quality than quantity. And if you disagree with me, then I have no argument, because clearly, the newest movie and the one that has been seen the least. But I think that if we talk about what is the cause of the Civil War, and many historians will now say slavery is the cause of the Civil War. And so if we're watching a movie, a film about slavery and its ending, and the kind of the way Lincoln pushed forth the 13th Amendment, trying to give equality, I think that a movie about that is about the Civil War, and it's clearly about the last 4 months of the war in terms of what it's depicting. So I think that the depth of quality of what it's trying to articulate to us today is, I believe, making up for the quantity of the number of people who have seen it or the number of awards that it has won.
Dan, last name unknown, has his hand up. Dan, go ahead.
Yes, Dan Ursu. Jimmy, out of all the films that have portrayed President Lincoln, in my opinion, this is probably what he was most like. Can you speak to that relative to other film productions and why that makes this film so important?
I unfortunately can't speak to too many other movies, but in both my viewing of this film and my reading and research before, I think that the attempt by the actors, both who played Lincoln and those around him, were trying to kind of wrestle with and understand who Lincoln was as a person in his humor, in his frailties, in his struggles. So perhaps the humanization of the character, I think, is why so many people were attracted to the role and kind of inspired by it. You know, when we can hear positive messages spoken, and then we can hear positive messages spoken in a way that moves our heart. It's kind of that prophetic piece. And so I think that the film does such a great job through the characterization, the acting, and all these other cinematic elements. And perhaps that's what you're getting at, Dan, is the way that this character was developed and written, both true to history as much as one could know, the character Lincoln, true to history as much as one can know the humanity of the man, and also the actions that he was trying to take in terms of keeping the Union together and working for equality by passing the amendment.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Dan Zeiser posted in chat, I've read that Spielberg is fascinated with sound, so he's very interested in getting sounds just right. All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We turn next to Eric Lindblade, who by random draw is going last as our newest member. Welcome, Eric. Eric will be speaking on the movie Gettysburg from 1993.
Well, thank you for this. It's wonderful to join you. I'm also happy to be a new member. I picked the movie Gettysburg because I look at this through the lens of a public historian. My job is to ultimately interact with the public and give them a sense of how history is, but also how they view history. So if we look at this idea of what movie has had the most impact, it's not the movie that is the best movie. It's not the movie that has drawn the most money. It's the movie that has an impact on the way we view the war. Ask most Americans, what is the major event of the American Civil War? Many will say the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, we can argue this, but in the public consciousness, Gettysburg is that seminal moment. For many, they feel that the fate of the nation hung around this small Pennsylvania crossroads town over 3 days. So it's with that said that in 1993, when the movie Gettysburg comes out, it's not going to be a cinematic classic. It's not going to be a box office draw, but millions have seen it not only in the theaters, on television. Ted Turner loved to play it quite a bit when he owned Turner Broadcasting Systems. Also, it has had a lot of play in our schools. I mean, countless school groups I've had before they come to Gettysburg. What did you see? What did you do? Oh, they let us watch parts of Gettysburg. Think about also how this movie has caused individuals to view the way the battle is. Think about its take on July 1st. Buford makes his stand. Reynolds arrives and gets killed, and then the Confederates sweep them out of town. That's a very short-sighted view of what July 1st was, but it's a view that is very common to visitors we have here. Take for granted July 2nd. Little Round Top being the key to the Union position. If Little Round Top falls, the Union line falls, and if the Union line falls, our very nation might fall. That's a lot of pressure to put on a small hill here in Pennsylvania. And also, finally, the climactic point of the movie, Pickett's Charge. As a native North Carolinian, I must add that by law, I refer to it as the Pickett-Pettigrew-Trimble Assault, with guest appearances by Cadmus Wilcox and David Lang. But for practical purposes, we'll call it Pickett's Charge. And yes, I knew I ate a bunch of my moments there, my precious seconds doing that, but I'm bound by that.
I'll allow it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate that. We should also look at the portrayal of individuals in this movie. Who come out of this as the great heroes? The great hero of July 1st, John Buford. Nobody questions John Buford's contributions to the Battle of Gettysburg. For July 2nd, it's Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the professor turned soldier, the quintessential citizen soldier, if you will, that gives us all hope as ordinary individuals in challenging times. We can rise to the occasion. Chamberlain does that for us. And of course, the stalwart all 3 days, Winfield Scott Hancock. If you weren't careful, you would think that it was Hancock that won the Battle of Gettysburg, and some guy named Meade just makes a brief appearance at headquarters talking about how dark it is, not what he's going to do to the Confederate Army. As for the Confederates, Robert E. Lee is portrayed as this frail, tired individual. Lee's thinking is very short-sighted. Not only that, think about how they portray Richard Ewell, this bumbling idiot that if only he had taken that hill, the Confederacy would have won the day and would have won their independence. But its lasting impact, I feel, is on the reputation of General James Longstreet. Today on tours, I have very few people that have bad things to say about Longstreet. And frankly, if I say anything about Longstreet that's negative, I get pushback. I'm going to quote real quick from William Garrett Piston's Lee's Tarnished Lieutenant about Longstreet. He says, James Longstreet's negative image is not likely to change. His role in Southern culture has been that of villain, not hero, and cultural roles cannot be overturned by scholarship. I agree. But the movie Gettysburg and the book it's based off, The Killer Angels, is not scholarship. But it has greatly influenced how we view the battle and how we view the individuals that take part in it. How many people think if only Lee would have listened to Longstreet, it would have been a different event and potentially a different nation. So with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I just want to say, you know, it was once been told to me that the movie Gettysburg is the movie that Civil War students love to hate, but hate to love.
Thank you, Eric. We have in the chat, Jean Claridge has asked, Eric, would you also suggest Gettysburg has the quote, best, quote, worst fake beards, unquote, in Civil War cinema?
Yes.
Thereby defeating the other movies up for debate.
Yes, if this was about bad beards, this is, you know, it's not up for debate. That goes to that hate to love part of this. I mean, some of those beards I was waiting to see actually crawl off their faces sometimes. But yeah, it you know, it plays into that. Yeah, you know, I think it you know, even the way Longstreet's depicted, you know, think about the monument we have to him here on the battlefield. I refer to it as the Tom Berenger Memorial, which for a Cleveland connection, played all-time Cleveland Indians great catcher Jake Taylor. So let's remember that as well. But yeah, I think, you know, even the way Longstreet's depicted in that 1998 monument when it was dedicated is more the portrayal of Longstreet in the movie than it is actually Longstreet, the man himself. So I think that's something that we have to kind of consider as well.
I also want to note for the record that Jeff Daniels was ripped off. He didn't get his Oscar for playing Chamberlain, and that was a travesty. Perhaps you agree or disagree.
You know, I think Chamberlain, even to this day, he's the closest thing we have to a Civil War pop culture icon. Go through any gift shop in Gettysburg, you're going to see the Chamberlain bobbleheads, you're going to see the Chamberlain t-shirts, numerous books on Chamberlain. And I think it's because of the way he was portrayed in the movie. You know, yes, Chamberlain is quoted in Ken Burns' The Civil War, but that doesn't have the same impact on people. Numerous people say, I want to stand where Chamberlain was. I think ultimately it's because we see ourselves in Chamberlain. He's not a professional soldier. He is not a trained military man. He is this former professor that finds himself in this desperate situation that we all hope if we were in that same type of circumstance, we could do the same. And I think that is why it sort of resonates, his character especially, more than any others.
Battlefield details aside, do you think Daniel's portrayal of Chamberlain captured his character?
From what I've read about Chamberlain, yes, I think it's a pretty accurate depiction. Nothing really stands out. You know, as far as the depiction that I think is not as accurate, I would actually go with John Buford's or Sam Elliott's portrayal of John Buford. Buford is kind of this almost kind of cold, aloof, distant figure, this grizzled veteran. That's a far cry from the actual John Buford, who is, by all accounts, very jovial, very engaged with his staff and others. So I think that does kind of give us a sense of how we view these figures in the battle based on how they appeared on the screen, not as they were when they were actually here in 1863.
Thank you.
We have a question from Terry, William.
I saw a blue hand there, but now I don't see it. Now I do see it. Yes, Terry, please go ahead.
You need to unmute.
Mouse over to the lower left corner, Terry.
The battle scenes in Pickett's Charge were really, I thought, outstanding. They rival Private Ryan's in movies. And I just thought that it was a very good product of the movie.
Do you have a question?
Not a question, just more of a comment about the movie itself. The battle scenes in the Pickett's Charge were, I think, outstanding.
Eric, I don't see any. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as the battle scenes, I think it's a movie that gives many a good sense of what Civil War combat was like. I would argue it's not as bloody as it really was. Ted Turner intended for this to be on television, so you cannot have a Saving Private Ryan Omaha Beach moment on TNT in 1993.
I read at the time that Turner's cast, it was his movie really,
yes.
filmed an extra scene with all of Lee's generals coming reporting to him and saying, "General, we broke through. Pickett's Charge was a success."
Yes.
And Martin Sheen, as Lee said, "Well done, gentlemen, on to Washington."
Yeah.
So a little bit of alternative history, probably no more long extra scene.
And I think at the time also, after Lee said on to Washington, I think he also said go Braves. So
A question, if
more
I
time,
may.
Eric. If you could change, let's say, 3 things about the movie Gettysburg with a wave of your magic wand, what would you change?
Oh my goodness.
Good one.
I would basically rip it in half. I think the challenge is I'm a day one guy. I think it kind of gives a lot of sort of over a short shrift of day one. I would argue too, so does Ken Burns' The Civil War. It is not a mere skirmish. 17,000 casualties is not a skirmish. Also, I think there's some other stories. I would love to have seen Dan Sickles in Gettysburg. We need Dan Sickles on the big screen, not just his leg appearing briefly in Lincoln. We need Sickles on the big screen. And I think also the idea that Gettysburg is the climactic moment of the war. I do not believe it is the single most important battle per se. You can argue Antietam, you could argue Atlanta, you could argue any number of other events, but in our consciousness, it is. And I think the movie only reinforces that. So I don't know how I would incorporate Vicksburg into the movie Gettysburg, but I would have found a way. But then again, this is why I'm a battlefield guide and not a Hollywood director.
It's hard to think of a climactic battle in which the war then went on for almost another 2 years.
Yes. Yeah. This might be an old guide tale. It was told to me that a guide once did a tour. They're on Little Round Top. He finishes up Little Round Top and says, "Okay, we're going to move on to Cemetery Ridge now." The individual said, "Wait, there's more? I thought the battle ended here." According to the guide, the son said, "Well, Dad, you forgot to flip the DVD over to the other side." So there you go. I don't know if that's true, but it might be apocryphal, but hey, it's a good story.
Thank you. Henry Evans also posted in the chat, many veterans from the Civil War founded South Dakota. They named a city after Gettysburg. When I travel to the South, being from South Dakota, I'm no longer a damn Yankee which I was called from being either from Ohio or Minnesota. The culture of South Dakota is a product of the veterans finding the grace to build a community. Were you aware of that, Eric?
I am. I do believe their sign says Gettysburg, South Dakota, where the battlefield did not, or the battle did not happen. So, in case someone gets confused and finds himself in South Dakota. So.
And perhaps you can answer that timeless question of licensed battlefield guides. Why were so many Civil War battlefields fought in national parks?
Yeah, it's really easy. We had all this land. We had nothing else to do with it. Yeah, same reason. And I also have to commend the National Park Service. They took those bullet holes out of the monuments. Really well done.
Thank you, Eric. We now have a somewhat open-ended period for all 5 of our debaters to speak and rebut, and we'll go back in the same order in which they originally spoke. They may briefly rebut any other debater whom they wish to, and mix it up within certain polite bounds. So I'll turn back to Dick. Is there anything you'd like to say in rebuttal to the other 4 debaters?
I saw 5 movies. I liked them all. I didn't think Gone with the Wind was that different than what it really was like. I just, Red Butler was, he was a blockade runner, and those were the only guys making money in the war. And so I didn't see any problem with that. And we didn't get into the movie Gettysburg, and the major character didn't exist, and people always show up at Gettysburg looking for him. You didn't mention that.
Which character do you have in mind?
This Irishman there that, that got what? Shot?
Chamberlain Sergeant?
Rain. Gilrain. He got, 2 or 3 wounds in his armpit. I don't know how you do that, but
they breed them tough in Ireland.
I enjoyed all of them, and I thought everybody did a great job, and thank you very much. So,
thank you. Hans, in rebuttal?
Well, I'll say first as to Birth of a Nation, I think Pat's point is well taken, that the racism that it portrayed and really to a receptive audience, during that Jim Crow era, does it remain today? Yeah, but I can't blame today's racism or the racial tensions on Birth of a Nation, even to a minor degree. Birth of a Nation, I don't think anyone in this audience has seen it. It's an influence to the extent that 1,000 other events or productions are an influence. As to Shelby Foote's or Ken Burns's documentary, an excellent production. Once again, it's a documentary told through story-like sequences. It's excellent, but I just think that through generations of people, 3 generations of people that have seen Gone with the Wind, either as children or as teenagers or as young adults or as older adults, or taking their children to see it. There's the impact on our society. Reference is still made in popular culture to Gone with the Wind and Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara and these characters are just timeless. Lincoln, great film. Once again, I think it's more of a character study. Certainly, it touches upon a lot of themes that have certain relevance today. Jimmy, I thought your analysis was great. But in terms of the impact upon our national psyche, upon our greater consciousness, I just don't see it. I think for that matter, it's probably too smart for most of the general public. And Gettysburg, again, a great adventure, not unlike Private Ryan, but I just don't see its impact on what the American public thinks of the Civil War approaches Gone with the Wind.
Thank you. Henry Evans notes in chat that as an 8th grader at Byron Junior High, they saw a portion of Birth of a Nation. And I will say about 2-3 years ago, the Cleveland Cinematheque showed a remastered, restored edition of Birth of a Nation. And it is every bit the cinematic masterpiece and extraordinarily ugly bit of propaganda that Pat was driving at. Pat, any rebuttal for you?
Well, the cinematic features are undeniably fantastic, and that includes the music. The music in that movie includes classics like Ride of the Valkyries, which was first done in that movie, not in Apocalypse Now. It has original score, and it takes tunes that were familiar, such as Dixie and Battle Hymn of the Republic. So the music is a big part of it. It's very well done, which is the tragedy of the movie, because the other thing to say about the cinematic features are Civil War veterans were alive, some of them were alive to see this movie, and they all to a man said, boy, that looked like it really was. So there was a tremendous amount of care put into both the antebellum period, the Civil War period, and the Reconstruction. And final thing to say about it, the message from that movie is clear. Black lives don't matter, okay? And that message resonated for decades and decades, and only recently has it been rebutted in our country. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. Jimmy, as to Lincoln or any rebuttal?
Thank you, William. I first want to thank all of the panelists. I really enjoyed doing this. I was a member of the roundtable back in the early 2000s when I was at John Carroll as an undergraduate, and then moved away and recently moved back to Cleveland. So I'm excited to be a part of the group again and really appreciate the invitation to be here. I think that the debate, as I said, really comes down to the question of what is the meaning of the word impact, and how do we gauge the impact of a movie. And my argument, as I said, is that impact is more about the quality of what is being delivered rather than the number of people or the amount of money or the amount of awards that a movie has made, because those are things that we can see on charts and graphs, and that's not really up for debate if we're going by the numbers. And then finally, on a personal note, I mean, Ken Burns' Civil War is the reason that I fell in love with the Civil War. So if we were voting for that movie that made us all love the Civil War, or that thing that kind of was the entree into this, I'm sure that many of us, from these movies would pick that one. But ultimately, the question is, what are we measuring in impact? So again, thank you, everyone. And this was a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Eric, anything you'd like to say in rebuttal or in closing?
Yeah, first point about the idea of Buster Kilrain, the sergeant in the 20th Maine. I would not consider him a major character. Frankly, he's really there for comedic relief at times in the movie. But so I wouldn't really say he's a major character. And also as a historian, I deal in facts, not fictional figures. So that's why I kind of ignored him. But I think if we look at this idea that Gettysburg is the climactic moment of the war, the movie Gettysburg caused a massive surge in visitation to the battlefield here. It created a massive increase in those getting involved in living history. So it also happens in what I kind of consider a mini Civil War boom. We often talk about the idea of the centennial being the big boom of Civil War studies, but I would argue the early to mid 1990s is this mini boom. Certainly starting with Ken Burns, but before that we had the movie Glory, then we have Gettysburg. My gosh, A&E gave prime time to Civil War Journal. So that tells you all you need to know in this boom that happened because of it. The legacies of how we view it are still there. People will almost quote verbatim the movie as how they look at how this battle takes place. And I would also argue it's the only movie on this list that fundamentally changed the way we view a figure of the American Civil War. Lincoln reinforces what we already view about Lincoln. The reputation of James Longstreet was greatly increased because of this movie. Take a crowd that saw Birth of a Nation and ask them about James Longstreet, you're not going to get a good opinion. Ask the crowd that sees the movie Gettysburg about James Longstreet, and you're going to say, some will say he's the very image of a modern major general. So, I think there is a there, but, I think all of them outside of Lincoln are all heavily influenced by the Lost Cause. You cannot ignore that. I would argue, though, that Birth of a Nation just took what was already there and put it on film. And it continues to this day. Some would say in Gettysburg, it's a very sympathetic portrait of the Southerners. It kind of goes to this idea that what did the Southerners do to lose the battle, not what the Union Army did. I kind of agree with what George Pickett said, that I think the Union Army had something to do with it. Maybe the smartest thing he ever said in his life.
President Pettyjohn had a comment about Birth of a Nation and the Tulsa riots. Would you like to pose that verbally, Steve?
Well, I was just thinking that Birth of a Nation was, I think, 1915. And 5 years later, we have a massacre, basically. I guess we'd call them riots, but a massacre and a attack on a prosperous, well-to-do African-American community in Tulsa, basically eradicating it, killing hundreds. And, is there like a direct line there as far as the impact of the movie on people's attitudes?
I don't know that. I do know that after World War I, when Black veterans came back, they encountered extreme amounts of racism, and race riots were not confined to Tulsa. There was one in Chicago, a big one.
Yeah.
where my grandfather was living at the time, and other
Springfield.
places. So I think it was
Springfield,
a general negative reaction to returning Black veterans.
I've seen a picture of Black Americans in the uniform of the United States Army being pulled off buses in 1919 and being lynched.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, and I should note too, you talk about race riots, the only successful coup in American history of a civil government took place in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. So,
Right.
We have this period that, I don't know if there's a direct connection to it, but man, the atmosphere was ripe for it, certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you've all illustrated how far we've come and yet how far we still have to go.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you to our 5 debaters. Steve, any comments you'd like to make before we turn to the vote?
Well, I thought I would put the poll up and explain how that's going to work and then make a few commercial announcements for coming events and what have you. But I did want to observe that this is one of my favorite nights of the year at the round table. It always has been. And tonight upheld all of my expectations with really outstanding presentations. And if I may say, very thought-provoking presentations from all of the debaters. And I've been up there a couple of times and I know the work that goes in to these things. And these folks obviously put a heck of a lot of work in to provide us with an interesting and entertaining evening. Although nobody did sing John Brown's Body this year, so I'm just terribly disappointed. Seriously, thank you all very much. This has really been a great night, and I use that word sparingly. So thank you all very much. I want to thank everybody that came out tonight via Zoom. And William, I want to thank you for doing your usual great job of moderating. And now what I'm going to do is launch the poll function. And what you should see when I pull it up are the names of our 5 debaters. And you have the job of choosing the one you think that did the best job of meeting the criteria as established by William. And while you're thinking about voting, I'm going to give you some commercials for upcoming events, okay? So I'm going to launch the poll. Oh, and I think one thing we learned Monday night, and somebody correct me, we did a practice. The vote will not count unless you hit the submit button. Is that right, gentlemen? Okay. And the votes are all anonymous. They will just be tabulated, and we'll be seeing them tabulated after we get going here. So I'm going to launch it. And then I want to talk about a few commercials of upcoming events. Okay, I am now.
If I may, to reiterate, the question as originally posed was, what movie or TV production has had the greatest impact on how we view the events surrounding the Civil War? If you would now please cast your vote.
Okay, I'll launch the polling. And
Steve?
Yes.
Yeah, well, put my vote in for my own movie there for Ken Burns.
Well, we're not allowing the panelists to vote, so we're assuming they would vote for themselves.
Okay.
Okay, and anyways, that flubs things up from an administrative viewpoint. So we're going to launch the polling now.
Okay.
And as you're considering your votes, I want to remind everybody, and Eric, you may be interested in this, because on February 10th, our subject is the 19th Indiana at Gettysburg. Our speaker is Phil Spoggy. He is a reenactor and has been one for like 40 years. He's been president of the North-South Skirmish Association. He's made several trips to Gettysburg. And this is there because of my personal favorite. I had a great-great-grandfather in the 19th Indiana at Gettysburg. So your comments, Eric, about the first day being slighted in the movie are well taken. In fact, not that I would have voted for you, but I was holding up the Gettysburg flag. All right, March 10th, we're going to take another take on the Civil War. Our speaker will be Professor Tamika, Tamika Nunley who is oddly enough at some obscure school west of Cleveland called Oberlin.
Huzzah!
Yes, I was trying to get a rise out of and her subject will be At the Threshold of Liberty, Enslaved and Free African American Women in Wartime Washington. April 14th will be the History of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument here in Cleveland. And we'll have, I'm going to pronounce this right, Tim Cross or Prossi, who's the president of the foundation, Tim Daly, the executive director, and our very own Ellen Connolly. And finally, ending this program year on May 12th, we'll have, I think you would call him the legendary Terry Winchell from Vicksburg. And I asked Terry, who I talked to several times when I've been able to visit Vicksburg, you know, what would you like to talk about? Because, you know, what's the one thing you'd like to talk about you usually don't? And he said, how about the civilians? So his topic is Shut Up as in a Trap, Citizens Under Siege at Vicksburg. And Terry is a wonderful person, a gentleman through and through, and a really great scholar of the Vicksburg campaign and battle. So I hope everybody will join us. And we've been talking about if things get better, maybe we will initiate the Holiday Inn Independence, but that's all going to depend on where we are. So that's what's coming up. Let's see, we've got a couple people who need to vote yet.
2 more, and we otherwise at the moment have a tie for first.
William, I have a question.
Go ahead.
There are 2 of us here. Do we just have to do 1 vote?
If you're logged in as a single account, then yes, you just get 1 vote. If you can't decide between yourselves, then you should arm wrestle.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to have to have your own caucus.
Arm wrestle.
You're going to have your own caucus.
Okay, thank you.
Or flip a coin, but I like arm wrestling better.
No blood-curdling cries, please.
Oh, I hope not. Mute yourself if there will be any blood-curdling cries.
I don't know if we've lost somebody that didn't vote. No, we currently have 43 attendees on board.
2 votes yet to be cast, it appears.
And I have a hand up for John Fazio. Do we want to, does he have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I was responding to your question about the line between Birth of a Nation and the Tulsa Massacre. And I elaborated, I said I thought that it was not only accurate to say that the movie had something to do with the Tulsa Massacre, but I also think it had a lot to do with the thousands of lynching, and literally there were thousands of lynchings between the date of the movie, 1915, and the last, I believe, was recorded in 1980. And also, I think it had much to do with the dramatic growth of the Ku Klux Klan from 1915, especially into the 20s, when there were tens of thousands of them marching in Washington. You may recall some of those, some of that footage of that period, and into the 30s, in fact, and before it began to decline again in the 40s. So I do think the movie, though it had a lot of, I mean, there was a lot of technical expertise, obviously, that went into making it. The movie had a very seriously detrimental effect on our society for approximately 40 to 50 years following its release. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, John.
I don't see any other questions.
Would you like to give whoever's not voted another 20 seconds, shall we say?
Yeah, because we're at 5.5 minutes now, so 6 minutes, we'll close the polling. Now, can everybody see the votes?
I can.
You can? How about John Fazio? Can you see the voting in progress?
No, I don't see it, Steve.
Okay, okay.
I will tell you the current vote is Birth of a Nation, 8 votes. The Civil War by Ken Burns, 5 votes. Gone with the Wind and Gettysburg each with 11 votes, and Lincoln with 6 votes. So at the moment, we have a tie for first. And we're now past the 6-minute mark. So with your permission, Mr. President, I'll declare our co-winners.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations to Hans Kenzie and Eric Lindblade for Gone with the Wind and Gettysburg, respectively, our joint winners. And many thanks to all the debaters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As is always the case, the winners will receive fabulous prizes. If our 2 co-winners have their eye on a particular one as I hold it up, please let me know by email, and I'll set it aside for you. We have an Abraham Lincoln kit, a little figurine. Civil War Wives by Carol Birkin. Grand Gulf to Raymond, rather, a driving tour guide by the Blue and Gray Education Society. A Friends of Gettysburg Foundation 2021 calendar.
I already have that.
I'll bet you do. Perhaps you don't have the American Battlefield Trust 2021 calendar. And finally, by the American Battlefield Trust, Decision at Stones River. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, observations for the good of the order?
Okay.
Thank you to all panelists. This has been just wonderful. And it's been quite educational as well. Thank you. Everybody did a great job.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you again. We'll see you next month.
Yes, and I'd like to repeat, if any of the new members came in late, we'd like you to send us maybe a digital picture and a little bio to post on the website. We want to start a section there welcoming new members and introducing them to the club. So don't hesitate to do that. And this will be posted eventually on our YouTube channels for posterity, so you can tell your grandkids about the great job you did in this debate.
And thank you, President Pettyjohn, for selecting the topic.
Well, thank you all. So good night, everybody. We'll see you in February.
Bye-bye.
And thanks to Dick Cruz for starting this thing and for being such a gamer tonight, doing it on the phone.
Here, here.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.